This is probably the area of animal cognition that is most intriguing to people. This idea of animal language. So before we talk about animal language, I want to talk about language in general. Any human language can express any human thoughts. It might take longer and it might be more difficult, but human languages are able to represent the entire range of our thoughts. Or so goes the advertisement for the linguistics department. So the question about animal language is it possible to teach non-human animals how to communicate with humans using language? Or is human language somehow special? Or are we somehow different enough that we can communicate to each other, but not to non-human animals? Like, could we learn the language of dolphins? Perhaps not. Perhaps this is, there's a line from Wittgenstein who's come up way long ago in this course, that if a lion could understand or could speak English, we still couldn't understand it. So maybe that'll be the case. I want to distinguish between two kinds of signals in language. One is just going to be informational, and the other is going to be communicative. And this has to do with intentionality, of course. You intend to communicate some signals. Other signals are unintentionally communicated. Now, if you're playing poker with somebody and you are trying to fake an informative signal, that still counts as a communicative signal, right? So imitating a natural signal that you would imagine you wouldn't have intended if you had, right? Like faking a bluff or whatnot. That is still an attempt to communicate. It is just preying on people's second order intentionality. So humans can do this to each other. We know how to communicate. We know how to interpret signals. We know how to distinguish between intentional and unintentional signals. We're wrong about it a lot of the time, but we're right about it enough of the time to say that we are good at it. Language is really tough. And it might not seem tough to you because you've been doing language your entire life. But there's some properties of human language that are philosophically rich, right? Like it's a temporal language. We can talk about the past, the present, and the future, and distinguish those. Some languages you have to do that in a more roundabout way than others. In English, you might just have to add the letter D or ED, or the letter ING to make something in the past or the present, respectively. Languages are modal. Modal is a fancy philosophical word for dealing with possibility. So we can talk about how things need to be, or how they could be, or how it is impossible to be. We can talk about Batman, who's a possible creature. We could talk about my parents, or we could talk about invisible pink unicorns, or round squares, that kind of stuff. There's an artificiality to language. The linguistic form, the sounds that we make and the way that we write them down does not necessarily connect directly to the concept being invoked. That said, out of the top 100 words in the English language, there's only one that is 6 letters or more person. So there's something there's some correlation, but it is not absolute. Humans can produce an infinite number of new sentences. Humans can represent all of the logical relations with language. And humans can learn language from each other, not just from parents and not just from your genes. You can teach it to your peers. On the other hand, a lot of animal vocalizations, from our perspective, seem to be atemporal. They're about the here and now. They're amodal. They're about the actual, the present. They tend to be fixed. There can't be new ways of learning, new sounds that they make. Sometimes they are limited repertoire. And a lot of these are innate or at least instinctive. We're going to go through some cases where that's not the case, but this seems to be a default for a lot of creatures, right? There are many birds that are born with a single song that they will develop. There are many creatures like this. All right, so we've developed, or we talked about some properties of language. And now the question is, why should we study animal language? Is it just because it's interesting to us? Sure, that's actually a pretty okay reason anyway. But also it might offer us a window into animal lives, and it might offer us a window into the robustness of our own language and how deep its evolutionary roots are and what came first. We tend to study some very regular animals that we've already talked about, right? So some of the big charismatic megafauna, the large animals that are of interest to us. And there's decent evidence for language in a variety of animals, right? So I've talked about how whales can teach each other songs, but there seems to be culture in elephants and tamarins, dogs, parrots, corvids here just like crows and ravens. So it seems in a lot of these cases where they're teaching each other songs and they're communicating, we can distinguish between how the formal structures and the meaning of what they're saying. Again, keeping in mind the worry about clever Hans, that we might be reading into it things that are not immediately obvious or that are not true. But we seem to be able to make this jump from the fact that a lot of these animals share brain structure and brain organization with us, and if they behave in ways that seem linguistic, then they are also being using language in the way we do. But again, you don't have to go all in on Morgan's canon to be cautious in this situation. Animals are not humans. Like at the end of Cats, they tell you the lesson of the end of Cats is cats are not dogs. Animals are not humans. Okay, so let's get to the great apes. A lot of humans have been interested in teaching great apes language. And initially we thought chimpanzees, because they were our closest living relatives, would be the easiest to teach languages. In the 1930s, we started with a chimpanzee named Gua, who learned to understand about 100 words, but didn't produce any. In the 1940s, another was able to articulate some versions of Mama, Papa, and Cup. And we decided that maybe their vocal tract was not good at speaking. So there should be a different approach. We couldn't just talk to them like Dr. Dolittle does. Enter American Sign Language. So there's an ASL translator in this class, but I've taken some ASL in my past as well. American Sign Language has a different grammatical structure than English. It's actually closer to French. It's based on the French Sign Language. But we started training chimpanzees and other great apes on American Sign Language. And it turned out that was actually easier for them than to speak in words. They were able to combine the terms that they had to make full sentences, to make requests. We then also began using other artifacts, so particular symbols that were able to expand the repertoire of words used by these primates. And so one of the cool things about this is that these primates began to be able to teach each other these terms, this language. And in fact, there's some really cool videos of them judging each other for learning poorly or slowly, which is kind of awesome. Koko might be the most famous one. This is a female gorilla who was able to use American Sign Language. She met Robin Williams right after her pet kitty died. And then when she found out that Robin Williams had died decades later, she expressed sadness. I'll show a link to that video. All of this being evidence that, you know, these are creatures that are not that distantly related to us, that seem like they can learn lots of things that we would call language if humans did it. Therefore, it seems plausible to think that they might be able to engage in language and have a lot of the same cognitive feelings that we do. Again, though, one has to worry about Clever Hans cases and about Morgan's canon, the idea being that we might be interpreting too much because we want them to be human-like. One particular troubling case, and the reason we haven't done a lot of this work on dolphins, is the case of Peter the dolphin, which I won't talk to you about, but please Google it. Actually, you know what? Don't Google it. Don't go on Wikipedia. Don't look up anything on this. I'm not even going to post the link. All right. So that's it for this. That was animal cognition. There's a lot more open questions than there are answers, but I don't know. I think it's interesting and intriguing.